Y'all might start needing a kayak to get to work or something.
Yeah, we're having some flooding issues now. So
I'll be driving through there twice the next 3 days.
yeah, it's graduation week.
It is. I have one at Sam Houston and one at College Station.
Yeah, good for
and
you.
one at Texas State, all in 2 days. So it'll be fun.
No.
Victoria, thank you so much for joining us. What part of the world are you in today?
I am actually in Austin today. I'm headed to New Braunfels here in a little bit. We've got a grand opening for our New Braunfels office. But I've moved to Austin since I've seen y'all last. And
Awesome.
I know I'm a little closer to Bernie, which is great. And hopefully we'll be having a permanent office space here pretty soon, which will be good. But
that's great.
I'm quiet of my apartment today.
Yeah. I know Kristen just had a closing with you guys at y'all's New Braunfels office with Beth, and it was a great experience. So love to hear.
Awesome. I love to hear that. I'll have to tell Beth today when I see her.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to turn off my camera and let y'all take over. And then you should be able to share your screen if there's anything that you wanted to share on your screen as well.
Okay. So real quick, this is kind of what I'm thinking we're going to walk through today is I'm going to share my screen and put up the Farm and Ranch red line contract and kind of go through and talk about the changes. And then maybe, we'll obviously talk about paragraph 12, the compensation paragraph in the 1 to 4 and how that's kind of being portrayed, and then where to find that information in the Farm and Ranch contract, and then kind of open it up for general questions. Is that kind of what we're wanting to do today?
That sounds great. You're reading our minds.
Perfect. Man, moonlighting as a mind reader. Okay, Jimmy, you want to kick it off, or you want me just to take it and run?
No, go ahead. You're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So thank y'all for being here today. Let me figure out how to share my screen on this. Turn camera on.
This rectangle with the arrow pointing up should work, and then just hit and
we'll start there. Where is it? Now I just gotta find what. I think it's that one. Okay. Perfect. It takes me a minute. I've got all these cool tools to use. You know, sometimes it's Google Meet, sometimes it's Zoom, sometimes it's Teams. So I got to remember how to do it all. All right. I'm going to zoom in, make this big on my end so I can really see it. Okay. So to start off, if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand or turn your mic on, or I don't know how it works. I guess you can do the raise the hand thing, but turn your mic on and just stop me and ask. I'm happy to answer any questions as we go. I'm going to go through basically just the red line changes. I think if you've never seen a red line or contract, I think that they are a great learning tool. I'm a big visual learner, and so it really helps me. And so I really encourage a lot of people, when Trek comes out with contract changes, go ahead and get on the Trek website and download those red line forms. Sometimes they remove them after a certain amount of time. And so I always get on there and download them immediately and have multiple copies, because it's good to go back and refresh. So here's the red line that we've got for the Farm and Ranch contract. And you're going to know that it's the most up-to-date version because it's going to say 11-04-2024. So that's how you can tell. In that top right corner of all the Trek forms, they'll have the date that the changes were done. So there aren't too many changes in the Farm and Ranch contract. There were a handful more, I guess, in the 1 to 4, but most of those changes from the 1 to 4 roll into Farm and Ranch as well. So let's touch on a few of them here. So here under sales price, under paragraph D, 3 sales price D, all they did was they added in a dollar sign, kind of small, not a big change, just adding that in. I think it's helpful because it's talking, this paragraph's talking about the sales price will or will not be adjusted based on the survey required by paragraph C. If the sales price is adjusted, the sales price will be adjusted based on the difference between blank acres and the acreage set forth in the survey required by paragraph 4C. The difference in acreage, either increased or decreased, shall be multiplied by the sum of, and then it's a dollar amount per acre. So Small change, I think, but I like to cover all of them. Here on the second page under leases, so paragraph 4 leases, subsection C. So under natural resource leases, they have added in geothermal leases. So any natural resource lease. Oh,
We'll be performing a test of the fire alarm system,
That's our firefighter Colton, I think.
testing.
He's on duty right now.
oh, that's definitely in my building.
No need to.
Oh no, that's your building.
Be sure to mute yourself when that fire alarm goes off, Victoria.
Okay, I tell you what, how am I going to do this? Because I don't really want y'all to have to hear the fire alarm go off. I probably will mute myself. I don't know how long this is going to last. This is hilarious. I sincerely apologize for that. I did not realize they were doing that today. Thank you, City of Austin. Okay, so geothermal here on 4C. Natural resource leases means an existing oil and gas, mineral, geothermal, water, or other natural resource lease affecting the property to which seller is a party. So if you've got a geothermal lease, you've got to include that. Let's come on down here. Okay, this was a change that was made across the board on the 1-4 and the farm and ranch. So it's dealing with the survey and the T47 affidavit. So now you have the option as to whether you want to do a T47 affidavit or this T47.1, and it's a declaration. Basically, the difference between the two is one document requires notarization and one document does not. Now, if you're not going to do the affidavit, let me backtrack. The affidavit it requires notarization because that document it's a sworn statement and that document can then be recorded. Same thing with the declaration. It can be recorded, but if you're doing an affidavit and it requires notarization, you're just showing your ID. So to do the declaration, you may have to provide some more personal identifiable information about yourself as the seller. The reason that they now have this option is that some parties felt that it was, overly burdensome to the consumer to have this document notarized. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but you just have the option to do it now. So that paragraph is now going to read, talking about the survey. So here, let's see, that is paragraph 6. 6C, so the survey must be made by a registered professional land surveyor. So you're going to check one of these boxes, one of the 3, only one box. So within blank days after the effective date of this contract, seller shall furnish to buyer and title company seller's existing survey of the property and a residential real property affidavit or declaration promulgated by the Texas Department of Insurance. That's either going to be your T47 affidavit or your T47.1 declaration. Then buyer shall obtain a new survey at seller's expense no later than 3 days prior to the closing date. If seller fails to furnish within the time prescribed, there's 2 parts here, both the existing survey and the affidavit or declaration. So then if the title company or the buyer's lender does not accept the existing survey or the affidavit or declaration, buyer shall obtain a new survey at seller or buyer's expense no later than 3 days prior to closing. So it's important to know here on under survey under number 1, if you're going to select number 1, make sure that you're also selecting down here these boxes. So if the buyer fails to obtain that new survey, you want to make sure that you select either the seller's expense or the buyer's expense. And then subparagraph 2 has been amended to now read, within blank days after the effective date of this contract, buyer may, it doesn't say shall anymore. So it says buyer may obtain a new survey at the buyer's expense. Buyer is deemed to receive the survey on the date of the actual receipt or the date specified in this paragraph, whichever is earlier. If the buyer fails to obtain the survey, buyer may not terminate the contract under paragraph 2B of the third-party financing addendum because the survey was not obtained. So I like this line that's been included because it closes a loophole that has previously been there with that third-party financing addendum in all the contracts, but predominantly it's a great thing that they've closed that for the farm and ranch and the 1-4. So that's something to be aware of. Okay, so certificate of mold remediation. That's going to continue to be here under paragraph 6. So if the property has been remediated for mold, seller must provide to buyer each certificate of mold damage remediation issued under statute 1958.154. Must provide buyer each certificate of mold remediation, damage remediation issued, yeah, that's right, under the Texas Occupations Code during the 5 years preceding the sale of the property. So then they've bumped down that number 11 and created 12. So this is your MUD notice paragraph. So here it says required notices the following have been given or attached to this contract. So now they're not calling them a MUD, a WCID, or a PID. They're naming them out. So it's, for example, a utility, water, drainage, and public improvement district. So seller's failure to provide applicable statutory notices may provide buyer with remedies or rights to terminate the contract. So this has always been available. I'm actually kind of surprised that TREC included that, but I think it's a good thing because now it's really putting the seller on notice that, hey, if you know that you're in a MUD and you didn't provide the notice, the buyer has the ability to terminate up until the moment of closing. So technically, you're in breach. You're in breach of contract. At any point in time, if the buyer finds out that they're in a MUD, that the property's in a MUD, and the seller hasn't provided the notice, they can terminate. So at the closing table, you can cure that. But I wouldn't suggest waiting till closing. I would make sure that you have that ahead of time. So coming on down, see, there aren't too many changes. So here's the settlement and other expenses paragraph. So let's go through that. So the following expenses must be paid at or prior to closing. Seller shall pay the following expenses. They're deemed seller expenses. So they've just changed, releases is no longer capitalized. So releases of existing liens, including prepayment penalties and recording fees, release of seller's loan liability, tax statements, or certificates, preparation of deed, 1/2 of the escrow fee, and they've now included brokerage fees that seller has agreed to pay and other expenses payable by seller under this contract. So now you've got 12A1B that's going to read the following amount to be applied to brokerage fees that buyer has agreed to pay. And then you're going to have a dollar amount, or they're going to enter in a percentage of the sales price. So you're only going to check one box. That's important. Don't do a dollar amount, calculate a dollar amount, and put a percentage, just one or the other. So then C now is going to read C, an amount not to exceed blank to be applied to other buyer expenses. That's just that's just now a seller credit. That's a seller credit line. So 12A2 is now going to read buyer shall pay the following expenses. It's going to list the buyer's expenses. And then at the very bottom, it's been added brokerage fees that the buyer has agreed to pay and other expenses payable by the buyer under this contract. Now, I'm going to go through all the changes, and then we're going to come back to this specific paragraph because we have a flow chart that Capital Title's made. And I'm going to put that up on the screen and let y'all see that, and we'll walk through it together. Okay, FIRPTA, paragraph 20. So if you don't know what FIRPTA is, you should. FIRPTA is really, really important because it's not just an issue in Texas. It's a federal requirement for taxes. I do a whole CE class on FIRPTA. FIRPTA stands for the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act. It was enacted in 1980. So it's been around a while. It's amazing that a lot of people don't know about it that have been in real estate that long, but it's important to understand. So anytime you're dealing with somebody who is not a citizen, they're deemed to be a foreign person by the tax code, it's not a penalty, but there's an amount that there needs to be withheld from their proceeds and sent to the IRS because those individuals don't pay federal income tax. That's the basic bare bones reason behind it. I can get really in depth into it if y'all want at some point, but you just need to know FIRPTA exists. So they've changed this paragraph, and this is only in the farm and ranch portion where they now have an A and a B. So B is now added to read the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act of 1978 requires that a foreign person who acquires, disposes of, or holds an interest in the United States agricultural land must disclose such transactions and holdings to the Secretary of Agriculture. Foreign persons must file an FSA 153 in the Farm Services Agency Service Center where the land is physically located within 90 days of the date of the transaction. Failure to report is subject to a civil penalty up to 25% of the fair market value of the land on the date the penalty is assessed. Consult an attorney or tax professional. Now, that's been added. I do think some of this could change because of the bills that are on the floor in the Texas legislature. I need to check and see how they're moving along and where they're going. There are multiple bills that were up this legislative session regarding foreign investors in farmland and ranch land. So that section could change, but it's here for now and it's important to know. Another addition here, they've added a whole new addendum specific to 1031 exchanges. It's really minimal. All it basically says is that the parties have agreed to, one of the parties is involved in a 1031 exchange and lists the company. Both parties sign it. It's a very, very short addendum, but now you have a box here to check. If you're going to use that addendum, you need to check the box. And I think that is about it. Okay, those are all the red line changes that we've got on the farm and ranch contract. Does anybody have any questions?
Hey, Victoria, this is Jimmy.
Yeah.
Or go ahead. I think someone has a question. Go ahead.
Todd has a quick question.
Yeah, on that paragraph 20, how do you determine is agriculture for a foreign buyer? Right?
Yeah. Can y'all see that?
In B, is it an agriculture exempt, like a 1D1, or like how do they determine it's agriculture?
That is a great question. I would say I have not been asked that first and foremost, but my thought process would be
like a guy comes in and he's from Canada. I had this happen, and he's looking to buy acreage to turn into a hunting ranch. I mean, is that considered agriculture?
That to me wouldn't be agriculture, because I think the definition you're talking about for like an ag exemption.
Yes.
Okay. So I think they're two different things. So
Okay.
I think an ag exemption is really broad because you can run cattle under an ag exemption. I'm talking about, I think this is more talking about farmland that's going to be potentially taken out of production, or if a foreign entity is now acquired that farmland, to deter, the FSA office has to be notified of that. I don't necessarily think it's discussing the exemption part, but that's a really good question. I'd have to look into that.
So the FSA.
Yeah. So the Farm Services Agency Service Center. So each county has one.
Yeah, so it's more like they're in production with the land than just like have any kind of valuation associated with the property.
That's how I interpret it. Now, I could be wrong, but I haven't been asked that before. But it wouldn't hurt to check. It wouldn't hurt for the client to check and disclose. I think it's always best to over disclose on a situation like that, where you're unsure as to whether it's going to affect you or not, because if you don't disclose and you need to, I mean, look at the penalty here. Failure to report is subject to a civil penalty up to 25% of the fair market value of the land, which I think fair market value would probably be determined without an ag exemption. So, I mean, it could, or more, it depends. Sometimes, yeah, I think that's just what did Jimmy come in with?
That's what it says at the bottom. Consult an attorney or tax professional, right? Yeah. That's where that caveat's there.
Yeah, a tax professional that's specific in this, or an attorney that's specific on that. It's not my area of expertise, but I'll ask about that and find out, because that's an interesting way. I haven't thought about it in that regard.
Yeah, I just put the link on there for the Fed for Texas.
Okay. Perfect. Any other questions? You stumped me on one. Dang. Right out of the bat. Okay.
Hey, Victoria, I would just add, if we went back up to surveys, what we see a lot sometimes, and you can confirm this or talk to it maybe a little bit, is the survey
Yeah.
So
right here.
when we get a contract in the office, I know the escrow officers, first thing they want to know and see is the survey. So I know it says 3 days prior to closing, but just depends on how if there's been an asset change on that property where they've improved it, or they've added a barn, or they've added some kind of structure or new fence, or in that time frame, maybe it's a farm and ranch piece of land that hadn't been surveyed in 25 years. Just be ahead of that, I would say, as escrow officers are really going to want to try to get that survey as fast as they can, so underwriting can examine that and make sure there's no survey deals, because then you have to schedule a surveyor, and that can take 3 to 4 weeks and those type of things. So does that make sense, Victoria? I mean, anybody
No,
ever?
yeah, I agree. I mean, the
Just
sooner
really
you
be
do it,
ahead.
the better.
Just something to be mindful on your survey when you write a contract.
Okay. Any other questions? I think, or is everybody really ready to get into the settlement paragraph 12?
We're on pins and needles.
Yeah, I know. I can tell. I can tell. Okay, here we go. Let's look at that. And I'm happy to send this to y'all. We can get it sent out. Here is, I'm going to zoom out so you can see the whole thing. We've created a marketing piece.
Lisa, I think you guys had this before too, right?
I think so. And I think the problem that we're seeing is that there's different flow charts and different information, and just trying to yield best practices to move forward with that.
To move forward with this. Okay, so it's difficult to talk about this because everybody has a different interpretation. And so until there is some continuity between all of the different forms and the TREC contract, it's going to be confusing. I want to preface what we're going to talk about by saying that. The other thing is that you also have to understand when TREC came out with this, with the contract changes, there were existing forms with, from Texas Realtors that were being used, that were created until TREC came out with something to put in the contract. Those aren't being used now. I think that's really confusing with some agents. So I'm going to walk through this flow chart, and I'm going to try to then explain it to the best of my ability, the way I understand it. And then we can talk about it. So for the first part here on this flow chart, and I'll zoom back in so we can go through. I just want everybody to see it from a distance. So it's, has the seller authorized the listing broker to pay an amount towards the buyer's broker's fee in the listing agreement? So yes or no. So if no, has the seller agreed to, or let's start with, we'll start with no and then we'll go to yes. So has the seller agreed to pay an amount towards the buyer's broker fees directly through negotiations? No. So then the buyer is responsible for paying their own broker's fee under the terms of the buyer's representation agreement. So let's go back through and start with the yes and look at it. So has the seller authorized the listing broker to pay an amount towards the buyer's broker fee in the listing agreement? So if yes, then the listing broker pays the buyer's broker. The broker should use the compensation agreement between brokers form, that's TXR 2402, for the amount being paid by the listing broker, and complete the disclosure paragraph on page 10 of the sales contract with the agreed upon amount. You do not fill in paragraph 12A1B in the sales contract if for the amount the listing broker is paying. So then if the seller hasn't authorized the listing broker to make the payments, we're back over here to this portion right here, the second box. Has the seller agreed to pay an amount towards the buyer's broker fee directly through negotiations? So if yes, here's where the listing broker pays the buyer's broker. And so complete 12A1B in the sales contract with the amount the seller has agreed to pay buyer's broker. Actually, it shouldn't say listing broker pays. It should say the seller pays, because you're not, 12A1B is a direct payment to from the seller to the buyer's broker. So you do not use the compensation between broker forms. So that's TXR 2402, or complete the disclosure paragraph on this page for any amount the seller is paying. That's because they haven't agreed because the disclosure on page 10 is only for when you have the broker to broker. Now, over here, so let's say we're going the traditional route where seller has agreed to pay the listing broker, the seller's agreed for the listing broker to pay the buyer's broker an amount. Okay, so we're using that broker compensation agreement between brokers, 2402. So then here, if the amount in the listing broker is paying the buyer's broker is not enough to cover the entire broker's fee, buyer's broker's fee, the seller may agree to pay an additional amount directly to the buyer's broker in the sales contract. In this scenario, a portion of the buyer's broker fee will be paid by the listing broker using the compensation between brokers, TXR 2402, and a portion will be paid by the seller using 12A1B in the sales contract. So this right here is hinging upon, it goes back to what your buyer's rep says. So if your buyer's rep says you're getting 3, and then your seller agrees to pay a portion of that directly to the buyer's broker, that's where you use 12A1B. If the seller has agreed to pay a portion through the listing broker, you just use the broker to broker compensation form to pay that. So in a situation where neither the seller is agreeing to pay, the seller has their listing broker pay the buyer's broker, and the seller hasn't agreed to pay anything towards the buyer's broker, to the buyer's broker, the buyer is solely going to be responsible for the commission to their agent, to the brokerage that they've agreed to in the buyer's rep agreement. Okay, now there's one little caveat here. So in the farm and ranch contract, TXR 1701 is used. So the amount of the broker to broker compensation should be inserted in the ratification fee section on page 10. So that's going to be, I'm going to go back to the contract real quick. That's going to be down here on page 10. Okay, so what questions do we have on this that I can try to answer? Or how can I try to make it more clear? I'm going to zoom out so everybody can see it.
Victoria, just an observation. I think a lot of the confusion on how to use that paragraph 12 comes from the seller's agent may want to get some information from the buyer's agent. Like, can you provide me with proof that you have a buyer's rep agreement? And, the brokerage that the buyer's rep represents may have a policy restricting them from sharing that. So I think some of the agents have ran into that scenario where there's, we've got the need to clarify from one to the other if that document's in place. I don't know what the best practice would be to handle that, or what your recommendation would be.
I don't necessarily know. Maybe it's the brokers communicate with one another, that the brokers reach out and discuss it and disclose, yes, that we do. You are required to have a buyer's representation agreement. You've always been required to have one. People just haven't had one. That's the interesting part about this whole settlement lawsuit, is nothing really changed drastically here in Texas because of the NAR lawsuit. We were always supposed to have a buyer's representation agreement. People just kind of threw it to the wayside and didn't do it. And your commission has always been negotiable. It's just been presumed that sellers were going to pay pay 6%, and the listing broker is paying the other side too. But so what I really think the whole settlement, the whole lawsuit has kind of ruffled a lot of feathers where it's unnecessary and caused a lot of confusion, because you're exactly right. Now you've got a situation where certain brokers are telling their agents, you can't disclose this. And then you get in a situation where, how do you prove that they do have the representation? Are agents really going out there and showing and going on showings where they don't have a buyer's rep agreement in place because they're supposed to? that becomes a problem. I don't have a good suggestion though, to how to combat that, other than maybe the brokers communicating with one another. What other questions do we have?
Hey, Victoria, it's Krista.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Praying
Hey,
that
will
the
you-
fire alarm doesn't go off right now. So fingers
Are you-
crossed. It's good so far.
Yeah. Hey, will you go back to your contract page, please,
Yeah.
on your screen?
You got it.
And
What,
then I love Richmond's input on this too. So you're on your flow chart, it said that we needed to put the fee in the ratification part, which is actually at the top of page 10.
oh, sorry. That's my fault.
That's okay. So I just let's talk through, like as a group, let's talk through when to put ratification of fee in there, like the percentage in there versus fill in the bottom of page 10.
Hey, and so here's where the farm and ranch contract becomes confusing, because at the bottom of page 10, that just, to me, that eliminates the need for that paragraph 12 altogether. Like if the buyer and seller sign that bottom part and it's got the compensation rate there, everybody is agreeing to it on a contract form here. So it seems like paragraph 12 in the farm and ranch contract is a little bit redundant to me. I don't know if that's just my read on it. So there you have it.
But paragraph 12 in the farm and ranch contract is different than it is in the 1 to 4 family, right? It's not the same.
Let me pull it back up real quick. Let me come up here.
Yeah, let's look at this comparatively because it is very confusing.
Oh my.
Victoria, this is what we do all the time. We pull it up and look at it. One of our agents had actually took that flow chart from TAR and laid the forms out that it references in the flow chart form. And I'd love to finish that project because I think it'd be very helpful.
Oh, here's the fire alarm. I think. One second. I'm gonna mute real quick.
Anyway, hey, Lisa, we need to get Kyle to finish that project. That was super helpful what he was working on.
Oh, was it other cut? The draw?
Was that good?
Oh, who's draw? You're on the draw. I don't know. Coach. The last call. Coach is like sketching stuff out.
Let me see if I can pull up real quick the 1 to 4. I've got it somewhere, the red line version, and we can look at it side by side. 1 second.
Be helpful.
Yeah, I guess
I know you need it up here because you're blind.
I did.
Okay, here is the 1 to 4 settlement, paragraph 12. I think they're the exact same.
No, they are. I'm looking at you.
Yeah, that's the exact same.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
and that's where the bottom of page 10 makes things confusing to me.
It does. I agree with that. It does. I mean, I think Trek did the best that they could given the circumstances and the situation that they were in, because different brokerages are required to use different forms. Like I know some brokers are having them use their own forms. They're not using the TXR forms, which that makes it even more difficult because their forms don't follow exactly what the TXR forms say. So you kind of have to look at it, in my opinion, I think you have to look at it on the big picture scale. With Trek has tried to make one document that all realtors can use for specific transactions, whether it's 1 to 4 or farm and ranch. So that probably has a reason. That's probably part of the reason that it mirrors and it is redundant. I do think these forms are going to change at least twice. I think it's, excuse me, going to be kind of a ever flowing, progression of change, and they'll be tweaking them, especially with agents making these kind of comments. That's why I think it's important for agents to voice their concern and voice their opinion, especially when TREC is having their annual meetings, to submit comments to them. I've been told that TREC goes through all of the comments. I've been told that. I don't know that for sure, because I'm sure they get a lot of comments, and I know the legal department at Capital Title has submitted some things in the past that weren't ever addressed from these drafts. So I don't know how much consideration is put on them, but I do know that is available, and I don't know another way to have effective change other than use the tools that we have, and that's one of them. So,
Victoria, can you go back to page 10 on the Farm and Ranch, please?
I can.
Because we see a lot of inconsistency on even offers and stuff that come in on this, and going back to when to use the ratification fee versus fill in the bottom of the page.
Okay, you want me to talk about that?
If you have some input on that, or Richmond,
Okay, let me see. So,
Wait, what was the question, Krista? Sorry.
we're talking about, and we see inconsistency on this even from other brokerages. So I would love to have just a standard, way that we handle this. But ratification of fee, when to fill that in versus filling in the bottom of page 10.
Well, it's pretty clear at the top of page 10. It says, or at the bottom, if you read the bottom of page 10,
mhm.
do not sign if there's a separate agreement for the payment of broker fees. If you've got a listing agreement, and now they all outline the payment for broker fees, right? You don't fill that bottom out. And I see people fill out both parts all the time, and and we don't have to do it if we've got a listing agreement. I think that bottom part was originally put in place when there are deals made like off market, neighbor to neighbor, like, hey, I want my realtor to go to my neighbor and try to put a deal together to get to add this ranch to mine. And that's where that came from. And it's like an appendix that's like kind of a useless thing right now in terms of how they've done paragraph 12. Just my opinion.
Right.
I mean, I'd agree with that. I think it's redundant. And you're right. That's why that bottom portion was included. Short of TREC removing it, it's incredibly difficult. That's the other thing. It's incredibly difficult to talk about the settlement portion because it's going to change just as soon as everybody's like on board and has gotten their sea legs and figured it out. TREC's gonna change it again, and we're gonna be right back where we started with mass confusion. So it's a pickle, to say the least.
So is that all clear as mud?
pretty much. I mean, I can do the best I can to explain it. I mean, how I view this on paragraph 12, it's what I tell everybody. Where I see the most confusion is people think you need to take, I'm going to zoom in just so we can see paragraph 12. People think, okay, well, seller's expenses, and that seller's expenses only applies to A. No, seller's expenses applies to from all of 1 all the way down to 2. And it's hard for people to understand the concept that the seller could be paying for something that they didn't negotiate up front. So I like to explain to people, you have to think about B, 12A1B, is what the seller is going to pay directly to the buyer's broker outside of anything else. Whether they've agreed to pay their own, let's say that the seller has agreed to pay 4%, and listing agent's going to get 3%, and then that other 1% from broker to broker is going to go broker to broker. Buyer's rep says buyer's agent's going to get 3%. So you're getting one part from the broker to broker. Then to make up that other piece, the parties could negotiate. Buyer and seller can then negotiate for seller to pay an additional 1%. So then the buyer's just paying 1%, and then your buyer's agent gets the full 3% commission, or the buyer's broker rather gets the full 3% commission. That's an instance where you would fill out the page 10, the broker to broker, and you would fill out 12A1B. But that's the only instance when you're subsidizing a portion of what's going to get paid. I try to explain to people, this is also a negotiation point. Like this can change. And there is an amendment too that can apply to the farm and ranch and the 1-4. I don't have it pulled up. Let me see if I can grab it real quick. There's an amendment that applies to it as well. Where is it? Amendment. Is this it? Yep, here's the amendment. So you can also amend after the fact and use this amendment to negotiate that as a negotiating point. So in the same situation, buyer's rep says buyer's broker gets 3. Seller has agreed to pay 4% to the listing broker. There's listing broker, there's a broker to broker with 1% in place. So where's the other 2% going to come from? Buyer and seller can then negotiate for the seller to pony up a portion of the remaining piece. So the buyer's broker gets the 3% commission. That's where then you can use this amendment, or you after the fact or up front, one or the other. That's one little caveat. Where you use all 3. Now you don't necessarily add the percentages. I had somebody tell me that in the beginning, that when you're using here on 12A1, if you put 3% here and then this disclosure down here on 10, where is it? I blow past it. I think so. Wherever it is, 8, 9, here it is, 10. This disclosure here has 3, then it's 3 plus 3 equals 6. Now your buyer's broker is getting paid 6%. That's not right. You're not adding these up to get a higher percentage. But the reason that's confusing is because that's going to be a point that's going to have to be litigated. And this hasn't been in place long enough, and really there hasn't been an amount in controversy, and this is my opinion, an amount in controversy that's high enough for an attorney to take it on, because that's going to be a lawsuit that's going to have to go through the district court. It's going to go to the appellate court, because whoever loses is going to appeal, and it's going to end up being a Supreme Court opinion, and that's going to be a lot of money at stake. So no one has been willing to take that on just yet. It may happen. It would be helpful if it did happen, I think, but you're still looking at several years down the road. Like, you're not going to have a case you're not going to have a lawsuit that's going to go to trial, have a verdict, have an appeal, get an appellate verdict, appeal the appellate verdict all the way to the Supreme Court within a calendar year. That's never going to happen. So by the time it's litigated, it may just be a moot point, because TREC will change the form. That's kind of the reality of it, which is frustrating, very frustrating for all of us here in the real estate industry, because it's confusing. What other questions can I answer for you on this?
I think we ought to start a bet on when the next revision is going to come out, because I bet it's going to be probably by November, a new version of this.
I mean, I would take that bet, unless TREC, I don't know if TREC ever calls special meetings, so I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bet against you. I'd put my money on November, about the time that they probably update the legal 1 and 2 classes, because legal 1 and 2, the contract changes don't even cover any of this. I taught that recently, and people were very disappointed. It's like, well, TREC hasn't done anything about it yet, but once it'll be interesting to sit for that certification this year to see what they have to say. What else? What other questions can I answer for you?
So Victoria, as a good practice, do you all want the broker to broker to come to title also?
I think I'd have to ask on the escrow side what they prefer. I mean, probably. Are we typically asking for that, or are you typically giving it up front?
No, I'm just saying, and part of this is stemmed from different other brokerages that we're working with, and the practices they are trying to enforce on deals that we're working on. just for instance, the other day I typically send out, and I may be doing it wrong, so learn from my mistakes. I typically send out a first round offer
Mhm.
without the broker to broker, but I will have the compensation outlined in the contract. And then I'm like, okay, if we get a deal agreed to, obviously I'm going to send the broker to broker, follow up with that. But we got a lot of pushback this week on a deal. They're like, you didn't send the broker to broker with the offer. And I'm like, well, should I be doing that? I don't really know. But that was the first, we've done a number of deals this year. I'm like, that's the first time I've had anybody enforce that. Richmond may have some input on that too, but I'm like, it was outlined in the contract. And then after they said, we've agreed to all terms, they tried to come back and retrade on the commission. And I'm like, wait a minute, you said you agreed to all the terms. And
Right.
so we kind of, we butted heads a little bit. So just kind of wondering what some good practices are on some of that, just because there's so much inconsistency on what other brokers are trying to enforce.
I'm not so sure on the from outside of the broker to broker with the offer. But from the title company perspective, I mean, it's kind of going hand in hand. So we're going to know, we got to have the CDA. So the listing broker should submit the CDA to the title company to disclose the amount of compensation the seller is paying the listing broker. And then the buyer's broker should submit the CDA to the title company to disclose the compensation the buyer is paying to the buyer's broker that has not been covered by either the listing broker or the seller. So then that's another reason why when those two don't match, or there's money out on the table, that's another reason why B is here, because this instance can happen. That's why Trek included it. But, I don't know if you need to do that on the initial offer. Personally, I think that's probably a brokerage decision. I don't want to overstep. And I think it's 6 in one and half dozen in the other. But what as a brokerage, what do y'all typically do?
Well, I could tell you what I did. I mean, Richmond, what are we supposed to do as a brokerage? Maybe we need to circle up outside of this.
I've had those come over to me before an offer even comes, like in the reverse order of how you do it. It's going to depend on, I guess my philosophy is if it's legal, lawful, and ethical, do it the way that gets the deal done,
Yeah. It's kind of creates a mess with all of that because, when this first came out, people were, if you're disclosing up front and before you even get an offer, you're supposed to submit all offers to your client. But if you get an offer where you're not, they are paying a portion or they're not, that's, that affects how much money your client's getting. Right. And so I don't know. I think it's best to be transparent, but that's just kind of the way I think that's good all around is to disclose. But I know some people don't necessarily feel that way. I think it's 6 in one and half dozen in the other, and it's a brokerage decision. That's why a lot of this stuff too, it's hard on the title side for us to really come through and say, okay, this is how this works. This, in 1, 2, 3, and this means this, and this is exactly what you have to do, because all the brokerages are different. And it really comes down to what brokers are wanting their brokerage, what the broker's specifically wanting their brokerage to, how they're wanting them to conduct business.
Sure. No, I think that's good. We're talking about negotiation tactics later in our meeting. And so those priorities, I kind of wanted just to throw some of these things out now to see if y'all might, run across anything in your conversations with other brokerages, just to see what the best.
It's hard, and it's really hard too, because part of this settlement, and several of the attorneys, we've talked about this, we kind of have to be really careful with exactly how we're interpreting it, or what we're telling people, and how we're telling people to do, disclosures and things like that, because we're not on that side of the aisle, and it could be perceived that we are, crossing over into where we could have legal action brought against us. So that's why I know I'm not really answering your question, but we kind of have to dance on that gray line of explaining to everybody how they work, because at the end of the day, I don't have to have all of that to close a deal. What we have to have with the title side is we've got to just have the contract, and we're going to follow the contract and what the parties are instructing us to do. So, but it's the problem is that there are also so many other forms out there that people want to use their own form, or they're using the TXR form and they don't all jive. So we're going to be in limbo and in a gray area for a while, unfortunately.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate your input.
So I'm sorry I can't answer it directly. There's not a direct answer for it.
Just wanted to just some kind of conversation about it. Yeah, all good. All good.
What other questions can I answer?
That's perfect timing.
Literally.
Crickets.
There's my.
Clear as mud. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's about it.
Okay. Anything else we want to talk about other than the settlement portion? I'm happy to answer any questions you got, whether it's about the contract or not, any kind of legal questions.
Okay, is there a timeline for the establishment of agricultural conservation districts that they keep referencing on these farm and ranch contracts? Or what is the, not conservation districts, agricultural, it's in one of those paragraphs.
The one we went over, paragraph 20. Is
I know. They just left them in there.
that what you're talking about?
Now keep going up. Probably paragraph 8, 9.
Oh, the water course districts, is that what you're talking about?
Texas Agricultural Development District, right there. Paragraph 6, or what is that? Middle of the page, right? Nope. Up.
Up.
7, it's in 7.
Oh, right here, 7.
Agricultural development districts. Yeah.
Texas Agricultural Development Property.
Yeah. They don't exist currently. I'm just wondering if the legislature plans on establishing them.
Good question. No,
No. The answer is always no.
I haven't heard anything about that at Texas Development District. I don't know the timeline for creating those, and I haven't seen anything specific through the legislature about that this go around. I've been really involved on a lot of the MUDs and PIDs changes, and really to the rate decrease this session, but not. That's a good. I need to ask about that. Let me ask. I'm gonna write that down and ask. What other questions you got for me?
Nothing.
Anything else?
I don't know if anybody got on the class that Victoria did last week, the lunch fraud class that she did. But that was a really good class. I think would be great for this group another time, Victoria.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'm
Yeah.
I'm gonna get that submitted here in the next couple weeks, so we can have it for CE credit. So if people want that for CE, but I can do it anytime before then or after for not CE. If y'all just tell me what you want, and we can get on the calendar and make it happen.
Yeah, it's a really good class on raw lots and fraud that's happening across the state.
Okay. Anything else where you got me? Doesn't have to be contract related. Like open door for questions.
You know, scroll down on your contract if you would and go to the seller's disclosure part on the farm and ranch, if you don't mind.
Oh, good question.
Yeah, go just a little bit.
Where is it?
Where all the check boxes are on the left. Keep going, keep going, keep going.
Oh, here we go. Okay. So disclosure. Yep.
So a lot of times we see this, it's kind of hard to navigate, like even if you're writing an offer or whatever, I mean, that's the seller should really fill that in. And a lot of times we'll see that not filled in at all. And I think from a compliance standpoint, that needs to be filled in, right, Richmond? So it's like, I think we need to always follow up and make sure that the seller has filled that out. So if you're writing an offer on a farm and range contract, leave that blank. I mean, that's not information that we can fill in.
Correct. That's how I
yeah.
fill it out. I leave that blank and that just has to be filled out by the seller once they sign
Because
that.
sometimes we're gonna get it back and the seller doesn't fill it out. Maybe the listing agent doesn't require that or didn't ask that of them and it's not filled out. But from a compliance standpoint, that does need to be filled out. Don't you agree, Richmond?
Yes, and that's when I send Stacy on them when they don't fill that out. When they,
Yeah, exactly. So just kind of know that it is a little awkward to send that blank out, in an offer, but that we are not the seller. If you're a resident buyer, obviously don't fill that in on their behalf, even if you think you know that information. Make sure that's completed. And then on seller's disclosure, we could talk about that a little bit too on your farm and ranch section of seller's just other piece. So go down residential service contract, like where they actually have to fill out. Wait, hold up. Let me see. Sellers, where have any? I guess I'm thinking on the 1 to 4 family. Where am I thinking at, Richmond, where it says it's not required?
that's going to be property condition, I think, is what that's going to be.
Oh, like the exceptions from the
Right.
required disclosures, like when it's in an estate and the executors never live there, or when it's like in a bankruptcy, or you're acquiring it from the state, or it's been in a foreclosure, or things like that. Or if it's like let me see, is that in the maybe it's on the actual disclosure form. It's pursuant to the Texas Property Code. I forget the statute, but there's a statute in the property code that provides for
7B.
Yeah.
7B on that one. And
7.
it'll be the last box that says it's not
Yep, here we
required.
go. Yeah.
Yeah, B3.
Mhm. So it's 5.008 of the Texas Property Code. But there's a handful. I think there's 7 or 8 of them. But it's for sure it's when it's an estate, when bankruptcy, when it's a deed in lieu of foreclosure, when it's in a foreclosure, when there's some sort of, when you're purchasing it from the state of Texas or a governmental entity or a city or municipality, or there's one like familial transaction, I forget, but that's not required there.
But also value of the improvements versus the entire land. There's a ratio there as well. Like if it's worth less than, and I don't know the percentage, it's not required. If you go into the property code.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. On section 5.008. Yep.
And hey, now that we're finished with this, looking at this reminds me of something. I had a conversation with the Raymond. I can't think of his last name. He's one of the TAR attorneys, specifically about the NAR settlement requirements. And he told me that the NAR settlement requirements only apply to residential properties. And I said, okay, farm and ranch. He goes, is there an improvement on it? I said, well, we have a cabin in this case that needs to be pushed down by a bulldozer. He goes, then the NAR requirements in terms of having a buyer's rep agreement are required. He said, but that only applies to residential properties or properties that have residences on them. Now that was about 6 months ago. That may have changed, but I've got an email from him. Actually, I think I'll forward it to you just to look at. I've kept it just to have it.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that, because this is the first I've ever heard of that.
Yeah. So
Because this is so this handout that we made, all of this information came straight from Texas Realtors. Texas Realtors came out with something, and we took that and put it into a flow chart.
now, I don't think when they're looking at farm and ranch versus residential, they look at everything through the eyes of residential. I really do. That's how they look at it.
But
I'll
right-
find it and forward it to you.
okay, right here though, this red box down, and I'm going to make sure that y'all have a copy of this. But this portion of the settlement portion, it's my understanding it applies to all of them, whether it's 1 to 4, new construction, incomplete
Okay,
construction.
we got it right here. This is from David Jones at Deputy Director of Counsel, Director of Professional Standards, TAR, and this is August 27th.
Okay.
The settlement requires realtors to have a written buyer's agreement before showing a home. A home is a 1 to 4 family residential dwelling. The settlement doesn't make an exception for the size of the property or if it's considered a farm or ranch property. If it has a home, the terms of the settlement apply, and you would have to get a written agreement signed with the buyer before showing. Crazy. Anyway, I'm going to send this to you, Victoria.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard that. That's interesting.
Then we followed up with Richmond. Remember we had the conversation. Okay, so what's a home? Does it have to be habitable? Because I mean, ranches are the one that had taps, right? Like no running water. They need a match, you know. And so it's like we feel like there's some gray area in there.
Yeah.
And that's why I think they left the bottom of that ratification page like it is. That's why I think it's still there. So anyway, there you have it.
That's a good point. Okay, now that makes sense. Now, if you're telling me about that conversation and leaving the ratification portion, okay. I mean, it's interesting.
Sell real estate, they said. It would be easy, they said.
Yeah. Go to law school, they said. You won't ever have a bored day. You'll always learn something new, they said. They were right. They were right.
I mean,
Huh. Well, I've enjoyed getting to visit with y'all today. I don't want to take up any more time if y'all have other things scheduled, but I'm happy to answer questions or continue the discussion, whatever y'all like.
Hey, thanks a lot, Victoria.
Absolutely. Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you.
thank you, Jimmy.
You're welcome. And I just forwarded this chart and everything from the email of Victoria, so they'll have it. So
Perfect. Okay,
you
perfect. Awesome.
You guys.
Y'all have a great day. I look forward to coming and seeing y'all soon.
All right. See you soon.
Have a good one. All right, bye.
All right. Bye.